Good evening. Today we're here to give you a brief presentation on a potential amendment related to PRC plans and minor modifications. A detailed white paper was provided, has been posted on a dedicated web page for this amendment. With the readoption of the zoning ordinance in 2023, the board directed staff to review the PRC plan exceptions, particularly as it related to community facilities and open space. The amendment is largely focused on when a PRC plan would not be required when a site is requesting minor revisions. In 1962, the PRC district was created. It was the first planned district in Fairfax County. The communities of Burke, Reston, and Cardinal Forest are the only 3 PRC districts in the county. When a site is rezoned to PRC, a development plan is approved by the board. A PRC plan is required for all other uses, similar to a final development plan. Prior to 2007, the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services approved the PRC plans. In 2007, the board made a PRC plan a legislative process since many PRC developments were not subject to proffers and development plans were not specific with respect to number of units, layout, amongst other things. Given that the redevelopment could occur in unanticipated locations at a public forum due to the blob nature of the approved development plans, the board amended the zoning ordinance to change the process from administrative approval to a legislative approval with public hearings. When the PRC process was changed, there was no update to the provisions to when a PRC plan was exempt. The current provisions largely mirror those dating back to 1994 to allow for minor revisions to approvals. Essentially, what staff will be proposing is that the PRC district use the same process as other districts where minor changes may be permitted administratively. The zoning ordinance requires that all uses have a PRC plan with some exceptions. Staff reviewed these exceptions and started to compare them to relate to minor modification provisions in the zoning ordinance, which is how non-PRC developments are permitted administrative modifications to their approvals. In a PRC district, a site may be exempt from a PRC plan based on provisions on the site or if they meet the minor modification provisions. When staff began to closely compare the PRC plan exceptions and minor modification provisions, we determined that they were very similar and reached the conclusion that instead of expanding PRC plan exceptions, we wanted to consolidate many of these with the minor modification provisions. Minor modifications are an administrative approval that is reviewed by Zoning Evaluation Division in accordance with the provisions of the zoning ordinance. These applications are coordinated with the district supervisor and require a formal submission to staff. PRC permits building additions of the lesser of 10% of the building or 2,000 square feet, whereas minor modification permits the greater of 500 square feet or 5% up to 2,500 square foot of addition, or the addition equal to 1% of the building for developments over 250,000 square feet. Minor modifications also require notice of adjacent properties. Staff recommends removing the PRC plan exceptions for additions since most additions can be approved using minor modification provisions. This will permit the same building additions in every zoning district. Here's an example of this comparison of PRC plan exceptions and minor modifications. Buildings under 5,000 square feet and over 40,000 square feet get a bigger addition using minor modifications, whereas between 5,000 and 40,000 square feet, a PRC district could get a bigger addition than any other zoning district. Again, staff proposes to remove this discrepancy and use minor modification provisions only. PRC plans are not required to increase parking areas or changes to transitional screening as long as the change does not exceed 10% of the element, whereas minor modifications can approve changes to transitional screening and other site elements. Both require a review of the impact to adjacent properties. In staff's opinion, the non-structural changes that can be adequately reviewed by using minor modification provisions and a separate PRC plan exception language can be removed. PRC plans permit minor accessory structures to open space, and a corresponding minor modification would also permit minor accessory structures. Again, in staff's opinion, eliminated PRC plan exception language would still permit minor accessory structures under the minor modification provisions. Finally, staff is proposing to add a new minor modification provision to permit minor changes to recreation facilities to permit replacement of active facilities with those of similar size and impact. The proposed language is consistent with the past approvals for minor modifications. This would be a countywide impact. As I mentioned previously, we do have a dedicated web page for this potential amendment, which includes a detailed white paper, proposed draft text, as well as a copy of this presentation, and we will include a recording of this presentation also on the web page. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Go ahead, Tammy.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I noticed in the proposed language that the term materiality was not defined. It was more based on a facts and circumstances assessment by the zoning administrator. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what part of the language are you referring to?
In when you're talking about material changes,
in terms of the
you don't define materiality.
the rec facilities. Is this related to the minor modifications for recreation facilities? Is that what you're
Yes.
asking about? Okay.
That's the one in particular, but
okay.
I know you've elsewhere in the zoning ordinance, there are examples of material or immaterial changes. Do you intend to tighten that language up further, or will it be left to the discretion of the zoning administrator based on the facts and circumstances of each of the applications?
So let's see if Kathy wants to go on this. So currently under minor modifications, the language says the minor modification can be approved unless it does certain things. And what staff had proposed is say you could approve a minor modification, but it may not materially change approved recreation facilities except to replace an active recreation facility with a facility of a similar impact. So, you know, we're getting to there. Well, let's see if Kathy wants to give some examples, but you know, the language we've proposed right now in the white paper is what we're proposing to move forward with to the Planning Commission Board. Of course, we'll consider to take input on suggestions between tonight's meeting and future meetings. But Kathy, did you want to comment a little more about reviewing minor modifications and how you look at potential changes, particularly as rec facilities?
Sure thing. Just to sort of explain, if you're not familiar with the minor modification process in general, it's something afforded to the zoning administrator that's done under the zoning evaluation division. It's an administrative process, but it's not automatic in the sense of you can file a minor modification request if it generally falls within the guidelines in the zoning ordinance as far as what extent of things can be asked for. But they do get evaluated on a case specific basis, because what we're looking at is how similar the request is to what the board approved, the board or the BZA, depending on the application type. And in this case for recreation facilities, for us to even give it a solid consideration, we're talking about like types of recreation. So for example, active to active or passive to passive. So we are unlikely to take something that was approved and expected to be an active recreation facility and allow, you know, a sport court to be pulled out and just replaced with some benches and nothing else, right? If it's expected to be active. But within an active to active recreation request, for example, there are different active recreation activities that have different impacts on surrounding developments, depending on the circumstances, depending on the proximity and, you know, what's in the developed environment. So We do an evaluation against what the approval said specifically, the conditions and what's shown on the plan. We also talk to the various county agencies that may have relevant subject matter expertise if it's if it's going to impact trees or something of the like, or if there are potential transportation impacts to a particular request. And then we do also coordinate with the supervisor's office of the district in which it's located so that they're aware of it, so that they kind of generally concur with our thought process as far as it still being in line with the intent of the approval. So.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
Any other questions? Any other clarifications needed? Like I mentioned before, we do have the white paper provides a little more detail. Today was meant to be a quick summary and just gather input. We do have one more scheduled outreach meeting, same presentation, and that will be, is that Thursday, I believe? I don't have my calendar open right now. It's the calendar, our dedicated webpage,
Yes.
which I did drop in the chat, has the links to that. And we're also looking to schedule a meeting with Reston Association and the Reston community beginning of next year with potentially Supervisor Alcorn at that meeting. So that's still in the process of being scheduled. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
As this modification plays out, do you have an estimated timeline of when it will be considered?
The amendment,
and the various players that have to pass on it.
So the zoning ordinance amendment, as I mentioned, we're doing some outreach. Again, next week, we are working with the Hunter Middle District to schedule a meeting with Resident Association and the Resident Community beginning of next year. After we complete those outreach meetings, we'll kind of regroup as staff to see what next steps are. If we move forward with the amendment as proposed, if we make some changes, or if we have to regroup and consider something different. So that, the next steps is, we do our meeting, as I said, Thursday community meeting. We have a meeting with our planning commission. It's land use process review committee. Those are the only ones scheduled right now. And then once we regroup, we decide to move forward with the amendment, we'll be asking the board to authorize the amendment and set public hearing dates for planning commission and board public hearings. At this time, I don't have dates, but we're looking, early springtime next year.
Thanks again.
Yep. And again, the webpage that's dropped in the chat, that will provide all the information about upcoming meetings. So as well as working with your board member, if you have any questions, but you can contact me, contact them, and certainly be able to provide any additional information as well. It'll be posted on our webpage. And I'll go back to that. Again, the webpage with the information provided today, copy of the presentation, and contact. So unless there's any other questions.